Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we are once again very fortunate to have with us as our regular guest, Scott Ritter, arms inspector, author, commentator, and we have a lot to get to since we last spoke. Yesterday, we had two contrasting speeches. We had President Putin delivering his State of the Nation address to the parliament, in which he went through a familiar litany of accusations against the West. But the most interesting event really came at the end of the speech, in which he said that Russia was going to stay within the New START treaty, but would no longer participate in it. And any further arms control agreements would have to include NATO countries, the UK and France. And then we had the belligerent call to arms by President Biden, first when he visited Kiev on Monday, and then when he once again was in Poland, and again said we're gonna stick with it through to the end. And then today we have Wang Yi, got a very senior figure within the Chinese Communist leadership in Moscow, and expressing the special friendship between Russia and China. And again, there's talk of Xi Jinping visiting Russia sometime this year. So, and in the meantime, the war continues. So, Scott, the floor is yours. What's your take on latest developments?
You've been throwing quite a few bones there. Which one do you want to go
exactly?
Well, I just broad brush. You guys are familiar with Ray McGovern, the CIA guy, and Ray and I have known each other for a long time, and I respect him. I respect his resume. I respect his his status as an analyst. And but what I got most from Ray was what he taught me about the approach to studying the Soviet Union back in the day. Because back in the day, Sovietology, they specialized in looking at photographs of Victory Day, and who's next to who, what kind of hat they wear. Yeah, and you're like, oh my God, he's 3 inches to the left of this guy. It's a coup, kind of thing. And Ray said he never did that. He said that was just stupidity. He said what he learned about the Soviets was just to listen to what they say, because they tend to say what they mean. And I think the Russians have inherited that. I listened to Russian leaders. A lot of people were rolling their eyes when Putin gives these addresses. Well, that's more. I would just advise people to shut up and listen. Listen to what the man's saying, because historically speaking, you go back and look at Putin's speeches. What he says, he does, and if he doesn't do it, he says why he couldn't do it and what he's done to fix it and make it happen. The man just doesn't sit there. He's not an American politician who just lies every time he opens his mouth. He takes the role seriously. He speaks seriously. And so I tend to listen to what this guy says. And so I'm listening to the speech going, the West better wake up, because this guy's laying down some hard truths. And you don't have to read between too many lines. I mean, arms control is easy. That's right there in your face. But, when they talk about the special military operation, everybody wanted a declaration of war. I said, you got one. You just don't realize. I mean, Russia is a nation at war. Russia is a nation that's making the preparations to take care of the casualties of war. Russia is a nation that's dealing responsibly with the consequences of war. So Russia's at war. You just haven't woken up to that yet. Then I listened to Biden, and it's just platitude, nonsense. It's stupidity. It's hot air. It's rhetoric. It means nothing. I mean, how can you sit there and have the Secretary General of the of NATO? I'm sorry, he thinks he's Secretary General of the United Nations, but of NATO, give his speech where he, we have run out of ammunition. There is no more ammunition. Ukraine, you will not get enough ammunition. There's nothing we can do to help you with the ammunition. You're going to die because you have no ammunition. That's what he said, literally what he said. And then you have Joe Biden going, we're going to give you what it is. We're in to win. Joe, you don't have any ammunition. I mean, please align your speech with everybody else. Get with reality. But And so that's my takeaway, broad brush speaking. Everything Biden said is flight of fantasy. It's political rhetoric. But remember, this is Joe Biden, who in July of my puppy, mine's sleeping, so we'll keep him that way. In July of 2021, received a phone call from Ashraf Ghani, at that time the Afghan president, who was screaming, "I got 30,000 screaming memes coming over the border, boss, and we can't stop them. All that help you promised, it ain't here. And if we don't get the help, they're going to swamp us. We're going to die. We're going to die." And Biden went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. Stop. I need you and your security guys to get out there on the TV, tell everybody everything's going to be okay, that it's all under control, even if it's not true." That's a direct quote. Even if it's not true. It's about creating perception. This is Joe Biden. He doesn't deal with the truth. He doesn't deal with reality. His job is to shape perception, which is what he did. The cheap visit to Kiev, what did it accomplish? Nothing. What, is he supposed to look like I'm a brave guy? I went in there, up yours. I don't know if I could do that. Symbolically, up yours, Russia. I apologize to your viewers out there.
Okay, this is locals, and
So the and all that. When we know that a phone call was made to Russia saying, "Hey, the president's coming in. Let's deconflict," and the Russians went, "We don't care. Get him in there, get him out. It doesn't bother us at all." Then you could go to Warsaw and you can stumble around on the red carpet all you want. You can give your speech and you can look stupid and foolish. The Russians are dealing with reality right now, a harsh reality, a blunt reality. They don't put perfume on it. They don't wrap it up with a ribbon. They just put it on the plate and say, "There it is."
Scott, it's really interesting. It's really just kind of iconography here, because what we see in the West is they're trying to frame it as the Second World War. Okay, Zelensky is Churchill. Okay, Putin is Hitler. Okay, and it's good for CNN and MSNBC, even Fox News, because it's a very simple way of presenting it. But they never talk about the context, the origins of how this came about. Almost no one, except for maybe like Douglas McGregor, that gets 2 or 3 minutes a month on Fox, that this is the most avoidable war in the history of conflict that we know of. Okay. And so, but instead of doing an analysis here, I mean, Stoltenberg, there's no ammunition. Yeah. And then you have Biden coming out to say, again, this ridiculous democracy, autocracy. I mean, it doesn't have it doesn't stick to reality whatsoever. And as far as I'm concerned, it didn't show any bravery, as you pointed out. They gave the Russians a heads up. The old man's showing up for an hour and a half. Okay, well, whatever. We're not going to do anything about it. We don't care. They don't care. And then Biden goes back, and it was a fundraiser. It was to keep everybody corralled. Even the Italian prime minister, I couldn't believe it. I mean, and what she did was destroy her coalition, show all the fissures all through Europe. Okay, I mean, talk about self-inflicted. That whole trip was self-inflicted, and actually generated the very opposite that he tried to. Because you can have all the words you want, but we're going to promise you 300 tanks, but well, maybe 12. Okay, maybe 12 will be all right. Okay, we're not sure if they work. Okay, I mean, this is all bluster here, and that's why the Russians just don't take any of these people seriously. Why should they?
So look, I write for a number of outlets, and I'm not here to embarrass any outlet. But I wrote a piece that got rejected for publication because I took the Putin approach, which is to explain things in their historical context. But the problem is, for the West, the historical context is totally inconvenient. Nobody wants to talk about Merkel, Hollande, and Poroshenko. Nobody wants to talk about the awful truth that the West has been preparing for this war forever. Nobody wants to talk about how that Russia was the only nation interested in a peaceful outcome, that Russia was not searching for a war, Russia was searching for peace. Nobody wants to talk about it because it's inconvenient to the narrative that's been placed there. But that's what I appreciate about Putin. Now, can historical perfectionists take umbrage at this, that? Yeah, it's a speech. It's not a PhD thesis. So, if you're going to sit there and say, "No, Vlad, on September 3rd, blah, we know that Sikorsky woke up on the left side of the bed, not the right side of the bed." Oh, okay. Did that fundamentally change anything? No. Okay, so back off. But so Putin has laid out the case, and what's important about this is that the whole Russian approach is it has cohesive logic. You can disagree with the logic, but it's cohesive. It links together. It makes sense. It's factually consistent. The Western approach has none of this. This is literally just chaos, anarchy, rhetoric, nothing. There's no cohesion. And as you see, when they try to make it, they fall apart. I think the Italians are just a perfect example of that. Of trying to come in and just have, because you have no cohesion, you literally the centrifugal force of the illogic of what you're doing just throws you apart. So Putin's.
Let me follow up real quick here for George. I'm sorry, I apologize. It seems to me, I really like how you're talking about it lacks cohesion, and I don't want to go into the weeds now, but it seems so eerily familiar. COVID, the same thing, moving the goalposts, changing the goals, changing the narrative, how we think about it. It's very interesting how these people operate, okay? Because they have no strategic goal. They just kind of, feel their way as they go along and make sure they increase their power, okay?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, that the Western powers have failed to articulate what their objectives are in Ukraine. What is it that they want to achieve? I mean, it's like, we want to reverse all Russia's moves since, February the 24th. We want to destroy Russian power. We want to take Crimea. They're not able. I mean, they're pouring in huge amounts of money, but they're not able to articulate what their objectives are. What is
George? And then we have the Estonian prime minister saying that Russians need to be re-educated,
that's
rewired. Right, yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's like throwing everything against the wall and see if anything sticks.
Right.
This Christmas, my kids said, Daddy, what do you want to do? What's on your bucket list? What could be realistically? And I said, I want to climb Mount Everest. And they all laughed because they knew that I haven't been training, that I'm not capable of functioning in cold weather. I went to Cusco, Peru, and almost passed out at 11,000 feet. So the concept of me operating at 29,000 feet is a joke. And my point in bringing this up isn't just to point out how pathetic I am, but to say that for the West to sit there and articulate objectives, it's one thing to articulate an objective. It's another thing to have that objective be even remotely realistic. And here's one thing I also say about Biden talking about democracy and autocracy. For an autocrat, Putin seems awfully not concerned, but he is very reticent about explaining things to the Russian people, which tells me, the reason why Putin provides historical context and provides that is because the Russian population demands it. And that's sort of democratic, I would imagine, that if the population says, before you head down the path to hell, you got to explain to me why you're taking me down that path. What is the reason? What's the historical reason? Because no leader wastes their time doing something if there's not a need to do it. Now we come to the West with Biden just everywhere, everybody. What's that tell you about the population? We're not demanding anything because we're ignorant of everything. We don't know anything about Ukraine. We don't know anything about Russia. What we've done is we bought into this media-driven narrative that is more fantasy driven than reality driven. And so our politicians have no need to actually inform us about the historical foundation of what we're doing and why and why what we're trying to achieve is consistent with that. It's just about perception management. Again, back to Biden on the phone to Ghani. Say whatever you need to say to shape perception, even if it's not true. And that's where, but eventually words can't hold together structure. You need framework. The Russians have framework. And the Russians are going to prevail. I'm not saying the Russians are perfect. They're not. But they're darn better than what the West is putting out there right now. And when it comes
but then, Scott, the $64,000 question is, how does Russia achieve its goals? Because, as we've discussed many times here on the Gaggle, as long as the Zelensky gang remains in power in Kiev, Russia's going to have a problem. I mean, that it's going to have this hostile regime there and determined to go on waging this war against Russia. I mean, it's a regime change really that Russia needs.
It's the only thing. But again, I'll use the Ray McGovern approach. Just listen to what the Russians say. They've given us the answer. It's right there in black and white. We just refuse to acknowledge it. It's a two-phased process. Phase one, demilitarization. What does that mean? Killing Ukrainian soldiers. The Russians are killing them by the bushelful. It's so tragic. I don't believe everything Prigozhin says, but he hasn't lied yet about what's going on there. And when Prigozhin said, we killed 110,000 of them, understand when Wagner kills a Ukrainian, it's because they tagged and bagged them. The body's there. They've pulled the body out. They've evacuated the body. So when he says, 110,000 we killed, I believe that number because I've been the one saying that they probably killed around 350,000, probably even more by this stage. Ukrainians are dying by the bushelful. Demilitarization is a process that's been ongoing and is going to expand in the near future as the scope and scale of this conflict. A scope and scale, by the way, which General, I think Cavoli, the commander of the U.S. forces and NATO forces, Lieutenant General, admitted in Sweden, a scope and scale that's beyond the imagination of NATO. Beyond the imagination of NATO. He said, we could never imagine this. We're not prepared for it. We can't fight it. Russia's fighting it. Demilitarization is taking place. And again, just running the numbers. This isn't buying into rhetoric. Because first of all, the Russians haven't told us anything. It's not as though Russia's published their plan. You just have to run the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. Ukraine cannot sustain this conflict past the summer. They run out of ammunition midsummer. And when it's an artillery-driven conflict and you run out of ammunition, you will all die. That is a 100% guarantee. And my prognosis for the Ukrainian military is you will all be dead, wounded, or prisoners this time come October. Now we move into the more difficult part of this, denazification, which is a political problem. But I had Mr. Azarov, the former prime minister of Ukraine under Yanukovych, who is now involved with the government in exile. That doesn't mean they're going to be the government. He, in fact, acknowledges we're not going to be the government, but at least they're being consulted. And he said that Zelensky is a dead man walking. He either dies or he leaves. But the bottom line is at some point in time, the Russians are going to make it clear that Zelensky is no longer taught. Right now, Zelensky is one of the best weapons the Russians have because the Zelensky government is one of the most corrupt governments. This corruption is actually diverted significant amounts of resources into non-military means. They've gone into the pockets of corrupt Ukrainian politicians, etc. So he's the best weapon. People say, why isn't Russia interdicting everything at the border? Why? Let it go through the Ukrainian filter. It gets all, it breaks down itself. Inefficiency on the front line, corruption, etc. That's the Zelensky government. If you get rid of Zelensky, you might actually replace him with somebody who's competent, and then you have more effective. So Zelensky is one of the best things the Russians have going for them right now. But he will be removed. He will either be removed by the Ukrainians or by the Russians, or he'll voluntarily leave. But the bottom line is, about the time that demilitarization reaches its climax, Zelensky will no longer be a viable political entity for anybody. And either the Ukrainian military is going to take him.
I guess the second $64,000 question is, and I agree with you completely what you said, but is this an outcome that is tolerable for NATO, that has put all of its eggs into this Ukrainian basket? What I find terrifying is that this is existential for Russia. They've made it very clear for a very, very long time. And I don't want to go through that entire history again. But the West has made it existential for itself. It's volunteered to make it existential. I mean, this is a craven choice on the part of the West. It's not a choice on the part of Russia. And this will be such a humiliation, and particularly when you have people like Burrell that still believe that they're the garden and everybody else is the jungle. I mean, it goes through every single layer of Western thinking and the way they think about themselves. It's just unthinkable that the barbarians could win because we're the good guy. We really are the good guys. How do you get around that, Scott?
What is NATO going to do?
I'm agreeing. I'm asking you a political question.
No, but I'm saying
you on this podcast, you talked about a military math, and I've stolen it from you ever since. So I know the military math.
Right, but just what's NATO going to do? Well, I mean, even if it doesn't put in infantry of its own, it does have all kinds of missiles. It could issue ultimatums to Russia and threaten with missile attacks.
It doesn't have all
and then
kinds
Russia has to then decide whether, because Russia's been, very wary of getting involved in a direct war with NATO. I mean, very, very cautious. So then it really has to decide whether it is prepared to escalate into a direct war with NATO, which means the United States.
But NATO understands they don't have all kinds of missiles. Where are their missiles?
Well, the Americans have them.
How many?
Well, I mean, the Americans have quite a lot, no?
No, we don't. No, we don't. And I'll tell you why we don't. First of all, America has to be prepared for a war with Taiwan. Do you think we're actually going to take all our missiles out of the Pacific, bring them to Europe? Nope. Pacific Theater Command ain't going to let that happen. They're saying these are our missiles because we're looking at North Korea, which, by the way, just fired a ICBM missile up there and is threatening total nuclear war. So if you actually think that the Pacific Theater isn't just saying, hell no, you don't get any of our missiles, but we want all of your missiles because this is the most important fight we got coming. Plus, in 2025, according to all the American generals, we're going to be going to war with China. We need even more missiles. So all that production line that you guys haven't caught up to speed yet because you're stupid, Biden. If you're going to be talking big, at least have the industrial infrastructure to back it up. You're not producing missiles. We need them all. Europe, you ain't getting any missile in this losing fight because you're not going to win. So America doesn't have any missiles to spare. None. Europe doesn't make missiles anymore. Europe is in the position right now, and I'll just tell you straight up, they can't fight a war for more than 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, Europe runs out of everything because they prepared for nothing. You know who's been preparing for this fight? Russia. Russia isn't going to bluff. Is Russia looking for a fight? No. Does Russia want to fight? No. But don't threaten Russia. That is literally the dumbest thing you could do because Vladimir Putin may be the good cop, but behind that door growling, you hear him snarling every once in a while as Dmitry Medvedev. And all he has to do is open up the door and Medvedev goes, this guy out, man. He's crazy. And it's not just Medvedev. I'm using him figuratively speaking. There are Russians right now that are ready to play ball, play a game that the West thinks it wants to play. This reminds me of me, again, trying to climb Mount Everest. I'm talking big, but I'm not doing anything. I'm not on the treadmill.
That goes into what all three of us agree is that, Biden's heroic, courageous visit to Kiev and just like water off the back of a duck. I mean, you're not a missile, Biden. Okay, we're not afraid of you. Okay, you're just an old windbag. Okay, so it just seems to me what. One of the things I'm kind of looking for, and we see some of the cracks, okay, not always going in the right direction, but there is this sense of we're out of ammunition, we're out of missiles. We have a lot of austerity that to contend with, particularly in Europe. The blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, what else do they want us to do? Okay, we've emptied our pockets, we've emptied our stores. This is a crisis for Europe and as opposed to the United States, because this hegemonic grip that the U.S. has over Europe, I contend will have negative returns and relatively soon. Okay, because this whole pitch, try to get as much land back as possible for a negotiation. Like that, I find that breathtaking, and we're going to give you $500 million more to get a few more farms and a couple villages. Okay, that's what makes this so peculiar is that these two different forces are pushing against each other. There's almost kind of an admission we're not going to get much more out of this, but let's pour a lot more into it.
But they're not going to get anything out of it.
I think that's right. But there's also the possibility that, okay, you get an armistice, then you wait another 10 years. And then you start it all up again.
Russia will let that happen.
But why would Russia? See, time, as weak as NATO is, I think there's a recognition that if the industrial potential of the West was ever fully mobilized across the board, especially with the United States going to a war footing, Russia would be in trouble.
Yeah,
I don't think anybody in Russia is saying we can outproduce America. There's no one saying that. What Russia's saying is we have outproduced America. We have outproduced NATO. And at this present time, all the advantages accrued to us. Therefore, strategically speaking, Russia needs to win now, not later. Russia can't. If this war goes on another year, Russia loses, in my opinion. If this war goes on another year, it means that the West is starting to kick into gear and Ukraine has become sustainable. Right now, the Ukrainian model is not sustainable. That's why I'm so confident of a Russian victory. There's no way I run the numbers and have Ukraine lasting. But if you change things, and the world is changeable, it doesn't stay static. If you change things and suddenly Ukraine becomes a sustainable problem, that's very bad for Russia, very bad for Russia, which is why I don't think Russia, again, I don't know, but I have to think the Russians are smarter than I am on things dealing with Russia. So if I'm, dumb old Scott Ritter, simple Marine, sits there and goes, you got to win now, guys, or else the number game goes to your disadvantage down the road. I think the Russians are going, yeah, we see that too. So we're probably going to win now. And I think Russia is going to have a lot of urgency in this victory. The West right now they're not even politically capable of mobilizing. Again, Putin's words are attached to a Russian reality. Everything Putin said attaches to a Russian reality. There was no fiction in Putin's speech. Everything Biden says is attached to fantasy. There is no reality in Biden's speech. And as long as that's the case, I think Russia's got an advantage. The moment Western rhetoric attaches to reality, for instance, we're going to provide Ukraine with 700 tanks, with fully trained crews that are sustainable logistically, with ammunition. That's a problem for Russia because that's real. But right now, we're going to provide Ukraine with 700 tanks, but 693 of them are in a garage, and the mice have eaten the electronic, the wiring, and they won't start for another year and a half. That's fantasy.
But do we know that the factories in the United States are not producing tanks now? Do we know that they're not producing tanks by the dozen?
No, they are, because in America we still function as a democracy, and Congress has to allocate money, and that money is part of an open budget process, and it requires hearings, and then there's just a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen. We don't have secret tank factories. Detroit, Michigan is a depressed economy for a reason, because there isn't a secret tank factory in Detroit, Michigan, employing thousands of workers, paying them great money, producing tanks in secret. We're not producing any tanks right now. We have to put the order in. This is why, to give the Ukrainians 31 tanks, it's going to take time, because we have to put the order in to the only tank.
And also, to back up Scott here, these orders are already allocated for countries already around the world. People are in a queue here. I suppose those contracts can be violated and put Ukraine at the front of the line, but they build them not just to build them, they build them on demand, on how many they can sell. I mean, it's a business. Remember that, okay? It's a business, okay?
Now, we do have some tanks. For instance, the Marine Corps just got rid of 4 tank battalions, about 200, 300 M1 tanks that we don't have anymore. And so those tanks have gone somewhere. They're sitting there. They can be refurbished, but they got the good armor. So in order, we'd have to redo them. But again, to redo it, to strip armor off, you have to go to a facility that's capable of doing it. We only got one, because it's a peacetime complement. We've been producing. I love it when people talk about the American Air Force. The American Air Force is the great game changer. Really? No, not really. See, the American Air Force has been flying the wings off its airplanes for years. The one thing we haven't been doing in the American Air Force is air-to-air combat. Not a lot of air-to-air combat going on. And the thing about it is, budgets are driven by present-day necessity. And we weren't looking at the potential of large-scale air combat for the last 20 years. We've been flying strike missions against wedding parties and insurgents. Now we're talking about large-scale ground combat in Europe, supported by massive air combat. I'm here to tell you right now, we don't have more than a week and a half worth of air-to-air missiles in Europe. That means we can go to war in Europe for a week and a half. The entire American approach to war has been the sprint. We come in and we overwhelm you, we sprint you, and the Russians are in the business of the long fight. We're training for a 3-round heavyweight match, and Russia's training for the 15-round heavyweight match. And on the 4th round, we're out of everything, guys. Our knees are weak. Our hands don't work. We're down. The Russians are saying, Ivan Drago time. Bam, knock you out. So we just don't have the ability to fight the long fight right now. And it's because our economy has not been geared. I know that doesn't make any sense when you have a $900 billion military, but we waste so much money. And a lot of our money goes into sustaining a military industrial complex, but it's not going into actual war fighting. And the war that we've been fighting for the last 20 years has been a low intensity counterinsurgency warfare, not preparing for this.
They have a budget to justify the next budget. Okay. It always go bigger. Scott, I want to return to something that you said to George and I earlier. Are you still clinging to your Odessa stratagem?
Well, again, that's the analysts reevaluate.
No, but I think it's brilliant.
I am, but what I have to do is I have to be realistic, because a lot has happened since then. Because when I first articulated, first of all, we didn't have Putin's address. We live in a different world. Things advance. I hinged that argument off of a comment Putin made to a reporter in the summer. Remember, I talked about the Hungarian reporter. So I think we have to acknowledge that between that time and now, things have changed. And I'll give you an example of how things have changed. When Putin made that comment, we now know that Putin was still concerned about a collapsing Russian economy. It wasn't until recently that Putin was able to say with confidence that the Russian economy wouldn't contract 20 to 25%. Putin now can say that the Russian economy confidently retracted 2% and is going to grow and expand in the coming future. So he feels a lot better today than he did when that said. So sometimes when you talk about the Odessa pause, the Odessa option, those pauses and their options are a product of the reality, the confidence that you have. So there's that too. The situation in Moldova has changed dramatically since then. There's a greater threat to Transnistria. So a Odessa pause may not be to the benefit of Russia as it was. Odessa pause may actually serve to rapidly mobilize a Transnistria option for the other side. So I still believe that Russia could do this, but there's more and more there's more and more things that are coming into play that say that Russia may not feel the need to do this anymore. First of all, the absolute impatience with Ukraine and the West. The idea of the Odessa pause was, it's hinged on the fact that you have rational thinkers in the West that could take advantage of the pause. That is the only reason to give a pause is to give the other side an opportunity to do something. With the Zelensky government out of the picture, meaning they will never do the right thing, you don't pause for the Zelensky today. You pause for the West. But the West appears to be hell-bent on doing something stupid in Moldova. So to pause for the West to give them a chance to do what? Activate that plan? No. So logically, again, I think it makes sense for Russia, but Putin's in a stronger position right now. He no longer has to tell people, I gave peace every chance. The Odessa pause was about giving peace a chance. I don't think he has to give peace a chance anymore. I think Putin's in the business of, we're going to beat you. We're going to beat you. And if they want Odessa, and again, the only ones who can make the decision about whether they want Odessa isn't Scott Ritter sitting in Del Mar, New York, hypothesizing. It's a decision that has to be made by the Russian government. And they have not articulated straight up that that's the direction they want to go. I think Kharkov's history. I think you're going to see Kharkov belong to Russia in the next week or so. I think there's offensive operations right now that are raking the back of the Ukrainians in Kharkov. I think that's essential for securing Lugansk. I think there's other territories that are essential for securing Donetsk and Zaporizhia. But Odessa is only essential for Transnistria. And I have yet to hear the Russians articulate as much concern for Transnistria that I have. That doesn't mean that they don't. I just can't sit here and say, remember Ray McGovern, listen to what your opponent says. I'm not hearing the Russians make that noise. I hear Russian bloggers make that noise, but I don't care about them. I care about the Russian
Scott, I mean, the way you envisage Russian victory is the removal of Zelensky. I mean, the end game is Zelensky gone. So it's not even so much we got to take Odessa, we got to take the Black Sea coast. Zelensky has to go.
Yep.
Then who takes over? Is there some alternative government in Russia's minds? According
to Azarov, there will be 2 to 3 years of military rule. That there will be martial law with a Russian-imposed government that's going to engage in massive denazification. And they're serious about denazification. They will literally remove every piece of Nazi ideology from Ukraine. If you are a Bandera supporter, you will probably be arrested. You will probably be sent to a camp. If you have committed a crime, you will probably be sent away for 15 to 25 years. This is what he said. I'm not making it up. I did an interview with the guy, and he straight up said 2 to 3 years of massive denazification, after which whatever's left of Ukraine will hold elections, and the Ukrainian people will decide who rules them. Russia won't have anything to do with that. Now,
but with the proviso that Ukraine remains permanently demilitarized.
Oh, permanently demilitarized, will never join NATO. No, I mean, any idea that Ukraine is going to be this independent state that gets to, we're a sovereign state, we get to decide what. No, you're not. You're a defeated nation that for about the next 50 years is going to do what Russia tells you to do until you win the trust and confidence of Russia, and until Europe is able to deal with an independent Ukraine. I mean, Europe is. I know we blamed Ukraine for this, but Europe is responsible for this. Europe gave Ukraine false hope, false promise, all this stuff. And so it's not just about retraining Europe. Russia has to retrain Europe. I mean, retraining Ukraine. Russia has to retrain Europe. Europe has to show itself responsible enough for an independent Ukraine to exist. Because until that time, Russia's not going to go through all of this just to leave the cancer there.
Not going to do it again. Yeah. It's not going to do it again.
This isn't a problem that's going to, Russia's going to say, we're going to do it in 5 years. We're going to replay this. This is over now. Yeah.
One of the problems with a lot of people that think that they're smart, I'm thinking Responsible Statecraft. I think some of the libertarians over at antiwar.com, a couple of people over at American Conservative. What I think so many of these people that I used to think were smart, and I don't think they are anymore, is that they forget the fundamental premise and the predicate for all of this. And I'm echoing what you've said to us already, is that Russia it tried to engage the West repeatedly about security concerns that it had. The West ignored it. They blew it off. They made light of it. We have the special military operation. We're here right now. And the outcome is going to be a reflection of Russia's security demands. It's not about Zelensky or this guy or that guy. It's that we got what we wanted. Okay, that's what it's all about, and how that unfolds as we go forward. There's a lot of different circumstances and personalities, but at the end of the day, Russia is going to have its security guarantees met. Full stop. Yep. And I think that's the way people, rational people, think about geopolitics have to do that. Not all of this, woke neoliberalism and all that. It's just such hot air. And I agree with you, Scott. I mean, I sat next to Vladimir Putin for an hour and a half, and not only do people listen to him, I'll tell you something, Scott, he listens to other people.
Okay. Well, that's different for a leader too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's my take on Russian security. It's interesting because I think we're at we're always at a culminating point in history, but I think that we really are at this point in time, because what we're seeing is the final transition of Russia, the post-Cold War Russia, from adolescence to adulthood. Russia, I think we in the West have forgotten what the 1990s did to Russia.
Yep. And I saw
how bad it was for Russia, and how fundamentally weak Russia was. Yep. Even with a strong leader like Vladimir Putin, he had to take baby steps. He couldn't take big adult steps. He's been crawling, then walking, baby stepping towards a viably independent Russia. But you can't get, to the end without this difficult transition. You have to rebuild Russia. You have to redefine Russia away from an oligarch-driven, economy. You have to retrain the West to deal with Russia, and the West refused to exist. Let's look at arms control for a second, because START was a very important part of his presentation. When we started with arms control, fundamental, the disarmament aspects of it was the INF Treaty. The foundation of the INF Treaty, though, was the ABM Treaty, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which created mutually assured destruction. The notion of, reciprocity to the extreme, that if I'm going to die, you're going to die. There's nothing more reciprocal than that. And then you work down your way through a treaty process of verification and compliance that is pure reciprocal, and both sides have common shared vision of where they want to go. That works when both sides A, respect each other, and B, fear each other. Because when you're dealing with superpower politics, respect only comes from fear. Nobody respects people they like. They only respect people they fear. And so we feared the Soviet Union. We respected the Soviet Union. Now, ideally, when that respect, once you eliminate major issues of concern, can be driven by commonality of purpose, which starts to reduce the fear factor. But at the end of the day, you always have to fear that if I don't do this, because what is arms control? It's giving up your own fundamental national security interests and exchanging it for stability, predictability. That's what you're looking for. But then the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia came in, and we no longer feared Russia. We didn't even respect Russia. So arms control, to the extent that it existed for us to impose our will on Russia. And it was very much a one-sided affair. This is why START 2 never got ratified. I mean, it got ratified, but was never brought into force. START 3 never got off the ground. SORT was a joke. New START came in only because two things. One, there was no more arms control, and two, Russia was starting to grow up. Russia was starting to, trust me, if Russia was still weak, if Boris Yeltsin was the president, the United States would have said, because look what the Bush administration did in 2002. We don't need arms control. We don't need no stinking arms control. What, you want one of these treaties with the big protocol and the we don't need inspections. All we want is a 500-word, 3 paragraphs thing that says, yeah, we're going to get rid of weapons. And we're not even worried about you. Inspections, we don't care because you can't do anything. You're Russia, you're weak. We're America, we're strong. We're going to, that was the whole approach. And it was arrogant. And what did Putin do? He signed the damn thing. Why? He had no choice because Russia was weak. Russia wasn't ready to play the big boy game. 2009 comes rolling around, and America's going, hey, that START 1 treaty thing, it's going to expire. And that SORT thing's a joke. We sort of like a new treaty. And the Russians are going, well, yeah, we want one too, but we have a condition. That ABM treaty that your big boy Bush got out of, we need it back. We don't like your missiles. You've lied to us about missiles. It's real. It's a threat to us. We need to link the two. And Obama went, nah, I can't get that through the Senate. I can only get strategic reduction through the Senate, but then we'll work with give me time. I can make missile defense work for you. Promise me. I trust you. I mean, you trust me. I promise this will happen. And the Russians went, okay, we trust you. And so they went through with New START, fundamental mistake. Anatoly Antonov, the negotiator, admits today, bad treaty. Russia shouldn't have done it. But they believed the United States. They believed Obama.
Why was it about, Scott, why was it a bad treaty?
Because the United States has cheated fundamentally on it. Two things happen here. The idea is to artificially, you get the notion that we're reducing arsenals to 1,550 warheads. But that's operationally deployed warheads. Then you have a bunch of warheads that aren't operationally deployed. They're in reserve status. They're linked to launchers, but launchers are either dedicated, part of the cap of I think it's 800. You can 800 launchers or 700. One of those numbers. There's two numbers at play here. But what the United States has done in order to get our number down, we have B-52 bombers, B-52H bombers that are nuclear capable. We got to get rid of some of them. And so, the idea in the past, when you decommissioned a bomber, you took it out to Davis-Monthan, and some dude, big arms and a chainsaw, cuts it up. And then they lay out the pieces, they take a photograph and go decommission. Yeah. What America did is we came in and went, yeah, you see, we got this box here that gives us the ability to, do the dynamics for the delivery of the munition, and a wire comes down here to here. So we're going to cut the wires. It's been decommissioned. And the Russians are going, what happened when you reconnect the wires? Well, we're not. We decommissioned it. But that's not really decommissioned. And here's why it's a bad treaty. We didn't specify how it had to be done. We just talked about the end result. And the Russians go, but this sucks. Then you go to the Ohio-class submarine with its Trident launch tube. The Russians are like, you're decommissioning that for your numbers, But all you did is take a box out. And you had a guy testify for Congress that if the Russians violate the treaty, we can bring these tubes back up into, so they're not really decommissioned, they're sort of paused. So you're lying to us again. The Americans are like, no, the treaty doesn't specify all this. You should have thought about that during negotiations. And Anatoly's going, well, yeah, but we were agreeing on terms like decommissioning. We had a definition. Yes, but the definition isn't carved in stone. We lied. America lied, and the Russians realized it, because now what we have is we're getting the Russians down to 1,550, and we're at 1,550. But if the game changes, as the Senate has required us to do, we have to rapidly expand back up. So we have nuclear supremacy if and when called upon to do it. And that is not the purpose of arms control. That's the purpose of armed control, the American version, where we control your army. But arms control is supposed to be mutually beneficial and reciprocal, and the New START Treaty is not that. But the Russians bought it.
Scott, so what is if these are the machinations, and you're an arms control expert, so I'm going to take it obviously on face value what you're saying. So what is the future of arms control? Or maybe there isn't one.
No, there is. The Russians, again, I always get teary-eyed sometimes because I listen to Putin, I listen to the Russians, I'm like, why are you guys so reasonable? What the hell's wrong with you, man? Why couldn't you just be like me, a bitter, angry person who lashes out at everything when you've been screwed? And I'll say, you have every right to lash out. The Russians are like, yeah, treaty sucks. We're not going to do it. But we want to get back on this path. But here's what the Russians say, because the other thing about New START, which has been with every one of these strategic treaties, the Russians are always going, that American arsenal thing's pretty cool. But what about the French and the British? Well, oh, no, that's NATO. That's not. We only talk about America. Really? Those are American submarines, American missiles, American nuclear weapons on the British submarines. Why don't we call them American? No. But they're part of your integrated nuclear war plan. Yes, but no, they're British. The French, they're totally independent. That's probably true, but still, they're NATO.
But that's the Soviet Union. I mean, the Soviet Union agreed to this back when they started all these strategic arms limitation talks. That the British and the French, we don't count them. I mean, the Soviets were too reasonable in just simply.
Well, but the Soviets were also worried about because remember at that time the French and British numbers were very small.
Right.
So from a strategic standpoint, the Soviets wanted to get that American number of 30,000 down to a manageable number before you start talking about this other. But now that the American numbers come down, suddenly the British and French arsenals are significant. They become a very significant player here, and the Russians are going, so what's interesting here is the Russians basically said, yeah, we'll do arms control. I mean, it's going to be a new treaty, so all that crap you pulled on us with New START, it ain't going to happen again. Plus, France and England are on the table now. It's non-negotiable. And what's going to happen here is the United States is going to have to, the Russians are smart. They've left the door open, but there's no longer negotiation about the French. And so America's going to have to go to the British and going to go after the French and say, we got it. It's all one now. We got to talk about a NATO nuclear structure, which includes the B-61. Now, Russia's going to have to fold in their tactical nukes, which Russia has been avoiding doing, but Russia's, I believe they're ready to do that. Trust me, if Russia says, what, you want us to put the tactical nukes on the table, but we get the British, the French, and the B-61s, we're in, because now we have comprehensive arms control, which is what the Russians have been looking for a long time. But then there's the other thing that's going to have to factor in, which America doesn't realize, is ballistic missile defense, because America has lied from day one. I mean, I love the big lie in 2012. It's just an SM-3, guys. Just an SM-3. It shoots down airplanes. It doesn't shoot down missiles. And any missile it shoots down, it's an Iranian missile. Just an SM-3, except 3 years later, it's an SM-3-2A, which shoots down ICBMs. And the Russians are going, what the hell just happened? You lied to us again.
Larry Johnson told George and I, which is something I wasn't aware of, after Bush Jr. walked away from the ABM treaty, that the Russians took the cue and say, okay, we're going to build some. And they have anti-missile defense systems that were not allowed under the treaty. What do you know about that? Because I hadn't thought that they would say, okay, well, we have no treaty. We're going to start developing anti-missile defense.
My understanding is just the exact opposite. It doesn't mean that Larry's wrong, but my understanding is that the Russians, just like with the INF treaty, when the INF treaty ended, Russia didn't go out there and start building intermediate. For instance, they had the Caliber cruise missile. It's a sea-launched cruise missile, an air-delivered cruise missile. Be a hell of a system to have on the ground. Great operational flexibility, but Russia's not using it from the ground. Why? Because Russia's not getting ahead of the game. Russia knows that the strategic objective is to return to arms control, and so they're not going to invest a lot of money into a system that would have to be destroyed under a renewed INF treaty.
Right.
The same thing with the ABM, where Russia still has their system outside of Moscow, and that system's there, and they've done some upgrades on that missile, but that is still a treaty-compliant system if the ABM treaty were able to come back in, because Russia's goal isn't to walk away from arms control, but to come back and make arms control function.
Right. I don't know, Scott, I don't know whether you saw yesterday Robert O'Brien, who is Trump's national security advisor.
I saw that.
He was on Laura Ingraham, and he said, well, you know, the thing about arms control agreements is that the Russians cheat on all of them. So that was them. But then he said, oh, well, they were cheating on the INF treaty, and the missiles that they are using now against Ukraine are all the missiles that they had built in violation of the INF treaty, which I thought was a bit illogical, because the INF treaty was history in 2019, which is 3 years ago. But you know, they said, oh, they just built all this in violation of the INF treaty.
But that just proves my point about how stupid America is. You know, when the United States was talking about the violation, you know, eventually some information came out about what they were worried about, and about the specific Russian defense industry institution that there was the focus of their attention. It was the one that produced the Caliber missile, and it also was involved in the development of an expansion of the Iskander missile, not the big one, but the little thin cruise missile-y one. And what they did with the Iskander one is they put on a new guidance system to deliver a new warhead, but the propulsion system stayed the same. Now, I'm just a simple Marine, but I've been around missiles long enough, inspecting them in INF and Iraq and elsewhere, to know that if the propulsion system's the same and you put on more weight in the guidance system and a bigger warhead, the missile won't fly as far. So if the Caliber with its propulsion system, or I'm sorry, not the Caliber, the Iskander is compliant, meaning it's a short-range missile, and I'm using the same propulsion system with a heavier package, it's going to be a compliant system too. But what happened is, in the tests that were done, the Russians were testing, you can test flight sea-launched cruise missile from a designated ground system as long as it's designated, et cetera. It's not designed to operate from that. So the Russians had tested some Calibers from this system. At the same time, they were testing the other system, and our intelligence guys got it wrong. I know, because I'm an intelligence guy, and I know exactly what they went through. I don't know that they got it wrong, but I've studied that problem before. And I'm telling you, I know what they were looking at. I know what they were seeing, and I realized where the screw up was. And they wrote a report, and I traced the report back. It's classified, but I know the report exists, and I know who it went to, and I know what it said, and it had great ambiguity about it. And then the conservative idiots in arms control took that and jumped on it to use it as a negotiating ploy against the Russians. And the Russians were like, we didn't cheat. And they didn't cheat. If they had cheated, first of all, O'Brien's an idiot. What missiles, Brian? O'Brien? The Russians, you know, the thing about war, you dumb fool, is when you fire a missile, you leave debris on the ground. And I'm one of the experts that goes around and picks up little pieces of missiles and takes them back to warehouses and reassembles them and looks at them very like this for a long time to figure out what they are. If you don't think every missile Russia is using in this conflict isn't sitting in a warehouse outside of Sweetland, Maryland, someplace where CIA and DIA and other people are looking at it, figuring it out, you don't know anything about how all this works. Okay, we got trucks going into Ukraine. Those trucks are full of people like me who are wearing civilian clothes, who go to every place a missile impacts, and they pick up the debris and they take it back, and it's reassembled. And so we see what the Russians have. That's what. All right, I'm not giving away national secrets. This is what happens. So if the Russians used a treaty non-compliant AMF missile, we know it. They're not. Everything they're using. Again, I come back to the way the Russian approach is. And I can say this has been confirmed to me by senior Russian authorities. The Russians operate as if every treaty the United States has pulled back on is going to be back in place at some time in the future. And Russia's not in the business of spending billions of dollars to develop a weapon system just to give it away when they don't need it. Russia's not building new.
Well, the interesting thing is, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it was what I learned is that it was the Americans that taught the Russians how arms control works, because the Soviets were very, very skeptical. And that may be true, but it was really, if it is true, it's very interesting is that now it's the Russians trying to convince the Americans the value of arms control, because we've seen ever since the end of the Cold War, really a highly dismissive attitude towards arms control. And it's been coming from the West. I mean, obviously at the epicenter of that is John Bolton. I mean, he never saw an arms control treaty that he liked.
But it's not just John Bolton. It's like anything. When you have a muscle and you don't use it, it atrophies. It goes away. Okay, we used to have some very strong arms control muscle. I mean, we had a guy named Paul Nietzsche, who was World War II kind of guy, original Cold Warrior, and he was the negotiator of the INF Treaty. You don't get any more old school than Paul Nietzsche, and he's not a friend of the Soviet Union, but he recognized the importance of arms control. We had a whole crew of people that Paul Nietzsche trained and raised up. The guy gave us the INF Treaty and gave us the initial START Treaty. It started the negotiations on START 2. And some of them were left for on. I mean, Rose Goldmuller, she's sort of the tail end of that. She's the last of them. She wasn't that good, but she was the last of them. She's
very political. I interviewed her once. She's very ideological.
I can't say that she's not informed. She knows arms control. I respect her credentials on that. But she didn't understand that arms control isn't about politics. Arms control is about national security, and she allowed arms control to become politicized. She's the person to blame for New START and lying to Anatoly Antonov. She claims that she has a friendly relation with Antonov. I can't say it, but I would imagine that Antonov's very bitter about her because she lied to him. She's just a straight up liar, and that's not a good arms controller. If you sit at that table and the other side doesn't trust you, it's gone. Trust but verify. You got to trust first before you can verify. And the Russians right now, who do they have? Nobody. We don't have any arms control people, any real arms control people. The State Department people today admit they're no longer in control of the process. The Pentagon's in 100% control of the process. And you can't have the people who build the weapons, deploy the weapons, and are ready to use the weapons responsible for limiting the weapons. That doesn't work. But the Russians did the same thing because we haven't exercised our arms control muscle. Their non-proliferation group in their Ministry of Foreign Affairs has gone away. It's now the Russian military that's doing it.
But Scott, arms control can only go together with détente. I mean, it's like, you have to have improved relations first, and then you have arms control. You can't really have arms control without having good relations. I mean, if you have terrible relations, and I think Putin was suggesting that, I mean, if relations now are so terrible, you really can't have arms control because, you basically, your enemies, you don't trust one another, and therefore you're not going to trust any kind of agreement that you would come to.
Well, we're talking about
the 1970s and 80s were time of détente. I mean, that was starting from the 1960s. It was the improvement of relations, and out of that came the SALT agreements and then the START agreements. But once relations collapsed, started collapsing 10, 15 years ago, that bang, boom, there goes arms control.
Well, we can't have arms control if you have Americans giving Ukrainians logistical and intelligence help using American missiles to attack Russian soil.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, and again, the Russians, listen to them. They've given us the answer. We will have arms control when Ukraine stops being a problem.
Yeah.
And so all this talk about arms control is theoretical. There will be no Russian-American arms control talks until the Ukrainian conflict is finished and the West accepts the outcome. That's just a statement of fact. And it's not me saying that. The Russians, Putin just said it. Every Russian person has said it. And the Russians aren't in the business.
And the West will believe it. They may spin it their own peculiar way. We can all expect that. But they will accept it out of self-interest, you're saying?
I believe so because they have no choice. Because NATO... Look, NATO is again, I got to watch what I say, not because it's dirty language, but I don't want to insult anybody. But so for anybody who's not Christian out there, I don't mean to insult you, but NATO's going to have a come to Jesus moment very soon. And it's just going to be because what happens when you're, I'd love to be a fly on the wall this summer in the Baltics when they have the NATO summit. And Zelensky thinks he's going to come waltzing in and be treated like a hero. Dude, your country's going to be gone by then. I mean, whatever's left is going to be burning. Your troops are going to be dead, and NATO is going to be in a panic because somebody said that they want to hold the Russians to account. They wanted NATO tanks on. This ends when Ukrainian tanks are in the Kremlin. You're right. They are good. It is going to end with Ukrainian tanks in the Kremlin. It's going to be trophy tanks lined up so everybody can walk by and cheer as Ukrainian banners from Azov are marched in and dumped on the ground like the Nazi banners, and maybe Ukrainian prisoners of war get marched by too, to a cheering crowd, kissing them as the great victory, because that's the future of Ukraine. And NATO's going to sit there and go, what do we do now?
What have we done? What have we done?
At that point in time, hopefully more rational minds will come in and say, we got to go into damage control. So we're going to initiate European security framework discussions with Russia. And the seed's already been sown. You hear Macron and Schultz and everybody talking about that. On the one hand, we're going to give them tanks, we're going to give them airplanes, we're going to give them this. But when it's over, we sort of need to talk. And we have to keep that open. They know it's over. Again, they're not stupid. I'm telling you right now, one of the reasons why I've been so confident in Russian victory is that in September, I did the math. And I looked at, after the Ukrainians blew their reserves, I went, it's over. Because they can't replenish, and Russia's in the business of expanding. And so all Russia has to do is keep in the grinding business. They can't replenish, Russia's expanding, and we get to the old-fashioned Game of Thrones moment. Final season. The Lannister infantry sitting there shaking, and here come the Dothraki with the dragon coming in. They're going to get swamped. That's what's happening right now. This is, or we can use the wildfire thing. Go to any wildfire movie where the whole country's on fire, flame coming, and the hotshot crew is sitting there going, we're screwed. And they get in their little tinfoil thing and to burn over, and they're all dead. That's where the Ukrainians are right now. That, I don't mean to gloat about it. That's just a reality. It's there. And so, Europe's going to wake up pretty soon and go, we lost.
And Scott,
nothing.
I would like to add, because it's something I don't want to let go, like a bone that my dogs will not let go, is that I agree with overall with your assessment. And once it's all said and done and over, the Nord Stream pipeline has still been destroyed. So at the end of the day, what did they get? Okay, they got a lot of deficit. Okay, also, do you think just
when you say they get, what do you mean? Who? What they got? What did the United States?
What Europe got for their support of Biden's war?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did they get out of it? Okay, it's really interesting. Is that unfortunately the world is goes through this torturous experience called the American presidential election cycle. This is Biden's war. I mean, I'm truly astounded how much he wants to own this. It's not a winning horse, but it's him. It's his war. He wants to go down in history as this.
And I think, as we pointed out, the Republicans have an absolute opening here precisely to say this is Biden's war. And you know that if it were Trump who was president, the Democrats would be saying, this is Trump's war. This is Trump's war. And they would be going after Trump day and night, blaming him for this war. The Republicans, they have Mitch McConnell, who just said, well, this is the most important thing in the world right now. The number one issue. So, there's an opening there, which unfortunately Republicans haven't seized on.
Well, but the Republicans are covered in as much Ukrainian blood as the Democrats are on this one. They've been voting for every single one of these packages. And politically, again, there's that old saying that I learned from a general who told me, Ritter, when you're explaining, you're losing. Because I'm standing in front of the general telling him why I'm right. He's saying, you're a lieutenant, I'm a general, my time's precious. I don't have time for you, leave. Politicians don't like to explain anything to their electorate. They like things to be so simple and dumbed down that the electorate assumes things. And right now, we have the American electorate fundamentally bought into the notion that Ukraine is good, Russia is bad. We know it's wrong, but that's what they believe. And so therefore, it's a very easy sell simply for McConnell to say, this is the most important thing in the world today because I've told you Ukraine's good. Y'all got the flag up there on your house? Good job, good. Way to virtue signal there, Erica. Social media, flag, flag, flag. Good job, guys. Ritter, where's your flag? You're a bad man. And all that. But the last thing they want to do is say, we were wrong. We made a mistake. Oops. and that moment's going to come. And when it comes, I think Biden feels safe because he has political cover, because both parties are going to sink on this one. Here's the thing, you know, we've always talked, everybody talks about this is the year for the independent candidate. This is the year for the independent candidate, but it's never worked because there's always been one candidate or the other who's been viable. If Trump becomes the Republican candidate and Biden is the Democratic candidate, neither one of them is viable. They both suck. They're both horrible. Trump will never get more than 30% of the Republican vote. The rest of the Republican Party despises this man, reviles this man. Biden is just an idiot, a bumbling fool. Even the Democrats are running away. But the problem is, are the Democrats going to leave Biden to go to Trump? The answer is no. Are the Republicans going to leave Trump to go to Biden? The answer is no. So you got this huge mass in the middle right now. And if America could just generate a viable independent candidate, this could be the year where we made history in 2024, where we actually elected somebody who's not held prisoner by the system.
Well, Scott, from a previous gaggle we've had with you, and I don't want to go into the weeds with it, but I know it'll tickle your fancies. We still have Tulsi Gabbard out there. Okay.
Hey, look, Tulsi is somebody I have a lot of respect for, but I think even Tulsi will acknowledge that she's probably not that person. Tulsi could be an asset to that person.
Yeah.
But I can't put a name to this person. I'm just saying that the opportunity is there. I don't know if America has that person. That's the sad part. I think America's become so divided that even though this opportunity is there screaming for an independent candidate, I don't know if we have one.
Well, Scott, okay. Let me one last thing. It would happen over the weekend here. There was this anti-war rally, and Jimmy Dore, someone I've been on his program twice, someone I really respect, and he's a man from the left. He was quite explicit without naming names, and I'm not asking you to name names, but he made it very clear during his presentation that there was an exclusionary list. It was very narrow who was allowed to participate. Do you want to comment on that at all?
I wasn't allowed to participate.
Well, okay.
I was invited twice, but in the end, they were going to, the Libertarian Party basically said that if I speak, they'll pull the permit. And if they if they pulled the permit, then the whole rally would have collapsed. And then everybody who worked so hard to get people up on that stage would have blamed me.
What was the reason? Why would they pull the permit?
Oh, twofold. One, I have a conviction record they find to be repulsive, and two, I'm not anti-war enough.
I see.
I mean, even though I oppose the Iraq War and I've opposed unjust wars, apparently my stance on the Ukraine-Russian conflict taints me as a pro-war person. So I wouldn't be allowed to speak about what I was going to speak about, which is arms control.
The reason why I brought it up, and I didn't want to bring it personal to you, is that this is one of the things that I find so terribly disappointing when I think of someone like Jimmy Dore, I think of someone like Tucker Carlson, both from opposite ends of the spectrum, but are going out of their way to at least come to terms on one of the most important issues of our lifetime, war and peace. Okay, and I find it very, very disappointing.
Right, and what's interesting, following up on that, is that you have somebody like Michael Tracy, who's not a bad person, attacking this rally because he's saying, well, they're a pro-war. This is a pro-war rally because they're pro-Russia. And then you had people on the left who were kind of gloating. Oh, look at how few people showed up. I mean, why are they gloating about this? I mean, aren't you against this war? I mean, but how few people showed up.
What kills me is on March 18th, I think, the left is going to hold a rally outside of the White House marking the 10th anniversary or the 20th anniversary, God, time's flown, of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And they're just gloating how they're going to have 6,000, 7,000 demonstrators. And they say, that's better than what this anti-war group did and nothing. And I'm like, but that's all you're ever going to get. You see, this was the first step for this anti-war coalition. It was a stumble, but they moved forward. And yeah, maybe they had 2,000 people, maybe they had 3,000 people, maybe they had 1,500 people. I don't care. The point is, they had some people, and they brought together people who talked about a very important issue. And so they went from 0 to 1,500. The left is going from 6,000 to 6,000. The left has reached a peak. That's all they're going to get. This thing, if they can survive the internal fighting and to get their act together, the interesting thing about the first time you do something is mistakes are made. And then a good organization looks at the mistakes and say, okay, we won't do that again. Boom. So who knows? The next time, maybe they have 20,000. Well, that's 14,000 more than the left got on March 18th. Then the next time they have 100,000, and that's like 94,000 more than what the left got. Then the next time they got 1 million, and that's the direction. See, I'm in favor of this coalition of the singularly minded, because it wasn't a pro-Russia, it wasn't an anti-Russia, it was an anti-war thing. But the thing about anti-war is you don't have to be a pacifist to be up there. I'm not a pacifist. If you threaten me or my country, I will kill you. I could have killed you more efficiently 20 years ago, but I'll still try. It's like climbing Mount Everest. I have great ambitions, but the ability.
Well, I'm sure you noticed that Ro Khanna, he was part of this failed letter to the administration about, basically tempering expectations and maybe more of an explanation. He was in Taiwan, so. Visiting Taiwan. I mean, this shows these people are not very serious at all. Okay,
No.
They're very establishment people. So,
all right. Well, Scott, this is a really, once again, fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for giving us your time. We learned a great deal. I'm sure all gagglers will be delighted by it. So thank you, and we'll see you again soon. So
okay,
all the best.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.